Welcome to the John DeVito Show. It is Sunday morning, and man, in Massachusetts yesterday, we had an absolutely beautiful day. I mean, we have Halloween coming up on Tuesday. It's late October, and yesterday was 80 degrees. I had the top down in my vehicle. We went and saw my son play football in the morning down in Walpole, Massachusetts. And then we came back, went for a beautiful walk with our dog, and then had a campfire last night. So you can't beat this weather. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, today, we're back to normal, 50 degrees and raining, and we're slowly moving towards the winter where we're going to have, probably a lot of snow like we always do. But yesterday was one of those days you just savor it. You enjoy every minute. You be grateful for it. We had my daughter home from college. And we just had a nice day yesterday. So today, we're going to curl up on the couch, watch a little football, see if the New England Patriots can bounce back from their rough start. They did win last week, which was good. But of course, we're still suffering from losing Tom Brady and now accepting life without Tom Brady. And I feel kind of bad. Mac Jones is a good kid, but he's struggling in the NFL, and the fans are really tough on him. And hopefully, the kid can find a way to turn it around and have a good season and at least a productive career. Because despite the fact he's making a lot of money, he's really under the gun right now in New England, and I feel kind of bad for him. So, anyway, that being said, that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today was, the good news is the Maine shooter. We heard the story. Everybody heard it about the gunman in Maine who killed 18, wounded several others at a bowling alley and another place where people were playing cornhole. And of course, this has sparked the great gun debate again in our country. And I'm not even going to debate that today. My feeling is, point blank, you can take the guns away if you want. And if you take them away, even though that's not going to happen under the Second Amendment, if you take the guns away, that's still not going to prevent the mentally ill from finding a way to kill. And that's the truth. People on the left don't want to hear it. All they say is guns, guns, guns. But the bottom line is we have a huge problem in this country with the mentally ill. Back in the day, there were mental asylums. Now, I don't know what the new politically correct term might be for something of that type of place, but I honestly believe we are at a place in this country right now where we need to bring back some type of mental residence, mental institution, whatever you want to call it, mental asylums. We need to bring something back because we have such a problem with those who are mentally ill roaming the streets without getting help and eventually killing, like in this situation here. Now, this guy who was the gunman in Maine, who they just found dead. I think his name was Card, the last name. He went into a hospital over the summer, and I'm not sure if that was July or August, but he was in a hospital over the summer after telling people that he was hearing voices telling him to kill people. He had been planning on shooting up a military base. He was, I think, an Army Reserve or whatever he was. He was somehow connected with the military. And this man was literally to the point where he was hearing voices telling him to kill. His voices were telling him to kill. So he went into the hospital for this. And after a couple of weeks of being in the hospital, he was released back into the general population. Now, we can argue all day long, as people say, quote unquote, assault rifles are the problem. And they're not even really assault rifles, that's not the proper term. But they consistently talk about guns being the problem. Now, I will say that I agree completely that Maine dropped the ball with this individual because, to the best of my knowledge, Maine has a law where anyone with a mental illness shall not possess a firearm. So this person never had his firearms taken away from him after he was hospitalized for a mental illness with voices telling him he should kill people. I mean, all I'm saying is if we had the proper services, if we had places where we could send a person like this. And it could be for for a certain term of time. It could be for their life. I mean, it's sad to say it, but some people are so mentally ill that they cannot be rehabilitated. They cannot be saved. But we have a duty as a society to protect the American people from someone that unfortunately has a mental illness. Now, this is not meant to be a slight on anybody with a mental illness. And not everyone with a mental illness wants to go out and kill people or needs to go out and kill people. So I'm not saying this as a slight in any way whatsoever of anyone that is battling a mental illness, because it is a very difficult thing to battle. I've had friends and family that have battled mental illness, and it is a very, very difficult thing to try to approach and to try to manage. And some people can get it under control and other people cannot. But while I have sympathy for the person that's battling the mental illness, if that person is hearing voices where the voices are telling them to kill people, that person is not safe to be out in public amongst the rest of society. And we can fight about guns all day long, but until we address the mental health issue in this country, it's not going to get better. One of the worst attacks in world history was in Europe with a group of people that had knives where they killed literally hundreds of people with knives. You look at what happened on September 11th. Now, there are people, obviously, that say this is a conspiracy. But if you look at September 11th, what happened that day was terrorists flew airplanes, jet airplanes, into buildings, killing thousands of people. The Boston Marathon bombing. Again, they were terrorists, but you had men who created bombs using pressure cookers to inflict murder, damage, and harm on people. So, is it easier to kill people with an AR-15 than it is a knife? Yes, most likely. Are there states in which guns are in the hands of mentally ill without being taken away? Yes, we saw that in Maine. But the bottom line is, there are people in this world that are so mentally ill that medication is not going to help them, counseling is not going to help them. They are a danger to others and they are a danger to themselves, and they cannot live amongst us. And back in the day, like we talked about earlier, they had mental asylums. And these asylums were hospitals that were designed to have people live in them that had mental illnesses that were so severe that they could not be treated. Now, I'm not saying that if we bring back a mental hospital or a mental institution today, that it can't be different than what we had in the past. I mean, the mental asylums that were in the past obviously were not humane by today's standards. But if we could invent or come up with a plan to create a hospital for people that are mentally ill that's more appropriate for the values of the people in 2023, then we, number one, could maybe help some of these people that are mentally ill. We could also make sure that society is safe. Now, I'm thinking about someone that I couldn't imagine being out in society. But in today's society, if these crimes happened, this person could potentially be out in society. Think about Charles Manson. Think about how insane he was, how he manipulated his people to kill. Now, Charles Manson's been in jail. He was found guilty of murder. But anyone that's seen any of his interviews realizes that Charles Manson is not all there. Now, what if Charles Manson lived today? Would he have gone into a mental hospital for a couple of weeks or a hospital and then been released back out on society? I mean, these are the questions we need to think about. There are so many people living in the streets in this country, living in tents, living in cardboard boxes, living under bridges. And most of these people are not obviously there by choice. These people are mentally ill. These people have mental issues. These people are hearing voices. And I see it a lot. I mentioned this on one of my other shows. I take walks in a city that's near my house. And I see the people that are homeless out in the street. And many of these people are talking to themselves, they're hearing voices, they have been thrown to the curb by society and not given a chance to be rehabilitated. Now, some of these people, most likely, if they were brought into a situation like being in a hospital and they were given the proper medication, some of these people probably could turn around their mental illness and be productive members of society. But for the guy in Maine, I mean, who knows what could have happened? I mean, if this guy in Maine was hearing voices that were telling him to kill people, if he were committed to a hospital or if he checked himself into a hospital, how do you know that this gentleman could not have been put on the proper medication, could not have been given a chance to quiet these voices that were in his head that were telling him to kill? And if they could not correct this gentleman's issue with the voices in his head, then it would have made sense to keep him in a hospital and protect the general public from his illness. And that may seem like a terrible thing to do, but what is the lesser of two evils? Taking this man who had a clear mental illness, who was being told by the voices in his head to kill people, or allow him back out of the street so he can walk into a couple of establishments in the beautiful state of Maine and kill a bunch of innocent people who were just out having a good night at a bowling alley, a good night playing cornhole. And as I've said in some of my other shows, now I live currently in Massachusetts, but I grew up in New Hampshire and I have spent a lot of time in Maine over the years. Now, I don't think I've ever been to Lewiston, Maine, but I've spent a lot of time in southern Maine, around Kennebunkport, Saco, Kittery, Biddeford, in that area. I've spent a lot of time in the North Country, up in the Rangeley Lakes area. I go up there in the summertime to have like a guy's weekend. Maine is without a doubt the most beautiful state that I believe I've ever seen in my life. And it doesn't end there. I mean, Maine's known for Stephen King and horror movies and things like that. But the people you meet in Maine are literally the kindest, nicest, salt of the earth people you would ever want to meet. And most would literally give you the shirt off their back if you ask for it. I mean, it's just a great state with great people. And what happened in Lewiston and in the surrounding areas is an absolute tragedy. These poor souls should not have been put in harm's way. And if you look at the whole situation, it was really mismanaged on every level. Where number one, as we've talked about, this gentleman went into the hospital for hearing the voices and he was released. And when he got back on the street, he was able to retain his guns. A guy like this, who has a mental illness, who's hearing voices, should not be allowed to own guns. He should not be allowed to buy guns. He should not be allowed to borrow guns or touch them in any way whatsoever. If we are allowing a gentleman like this with a clear mental illness to possess a gun, then we are failing on all levels. Now, this hasn't just happened in Maine. This has happened in other shootings as well, where if you think of Sandy Hook, if you think of Columbine, if you think of the shooting at the Colorado movie theater, all of these people had one thing in common. They were all suffering through mental illness. So the politicians get up and right away when something like this happens, let's ban the guns, let's ban the guns, let's ban the guns. I understand the sentiment. And there was a politician up in Lewiston, Maine, who was a gun advocate, and he got up on TV and said he was wrong and we need to ban assault rifles and all that. Now, from my perspective, I don't blame this guy one bit. I look at him and I see a man that was heartbroken by the horrors that happened in his own state, to his own people, to the people he represented. And I don't fault him at all for just being distraught with the destruction that was caused by this gunman. So kudos to him for getting up and speaking in the moment from his heart with, just caring for the residents of Maine and the people that he represents. So I give him credit for getting up and do that. I don't agree with his message that banning guns will help. I mean, keeping a gun out of this guy's hands should have been done. And the thing that's crazy is that there's a law in the books in Maine that basically states that people with mental illness should not bear arms. So my question is, we could put another 100 laws in place, but if no one enforces the laws that we already have, what is the purpose of even passing a new law? So my whole point of this particular show is, do we need to revisit the practices of the past where we have, as they used to call them, mental asylums? Do we need to have mental health facilities, mental hospitals, whatever you want to call them? I'm not an expert on naming facilities, but I do believe we are at a point in time in this country where we need to revisit sweeping mental health legislation where the government, instead of sending hundreds of billions to Ukraine, spends some money on its own people and really put some mechanisms in place that can help the mentally ill. Because right now, there's no help. The people that are suffering from mental illness, there is nowhere for them to turn. There's nowhere for their families to turn. And these people are just being left out to suffer and potentially harm others. And that is a failure on our society. I mentioned in one of the other shows, think about the young woman from Massachusetts, the young mother. She killed her children using exercise bands. She was suffering from postpartum depression. Her husband was fighting to get her help. She was turning everywhere she could to get help for this depression, and no one helped her. The end result was she ended up ending the lives of her children. She then jumped out of her second story window, and the last time I knew, she was paralyzed from jumping out of the window trying to kill herself. So her children are gone. She's now facing murder charges and the death of all of her children. Her husband has had his life completely destroyed by his children now being dead and his wife being up on murder charges. And this poor soul fought to do what he could to help his wife, but there was nowhere for him to turn. How can we let this happen in this country? It should never happen. It should not happen. And until we pass sweeping mental health legislation in order to help the thousands and tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands of people that are suffering from mental illnesses, these type of situations will continue to happen. People will continue to die, and lives will be destroyed in the process. So if we all want to shoot from the rooftops, ban all the guns, that's fine. But banning all the guns isn't going to prevent someone from using exercise bands to kill their babies. It's not going to prevent a gentleman, like happened in the Midwest last year, drive into a crowd of people and kill 20 people with his vehicle. It's not going to prevent people from using knives, machetes, crossbows, pressure cookers like were used in the Boston Marathon bombing. It's not going to stop people from getting behind the controls of an airplane and crashing into a building and killing thousands. The people who are mentally ill are going to find a way to inflict destruction, murder, and death on people when they are not in the right headspace. And until we as a society do what needs to be done to offer assistance to those who need it, and then for those that cannot be rehabilitated and are able to move into or back into our society, those people need to reside in a secure place that treats them humanely. Now, I'm not saying bring back the practices of the mental asylums back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, but we need to have a place that humanely provides for them, treats them, cares for them, and helps them with the mental illnesses that they cannot help themselves with. So, for the people of Maine, I issue my prayers. Like I've said, I love Maine. I know my prayers mean nothing for those that have died, but I hope that in this country we start to address the root cause of this violence. And that root cause are people that are mentally ill, that are not able to do the right thing, and cannot get the help that they need. So, for everybody that tuned in, thank you for tuning in to the John DeVito Show. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you that takes the time out of your day to listen to me. I wish I could personally shake hands with you, fist bump each and every one of you. But just consider this a virtual fist bump to everybody that spent time listening to my show. And if you have a chance, tell a friend, share my show, and hopefully you keep coming back. All right. Thank you and have a great day and have a great Sunday.